Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Premier Injuries Dailies Roundup. Now, we've heard from several managers ahead of their European ties midweek, so that's where we'll start. Hopefully, this goes live before the Chelsea game in Madrid. Now, Frank Lampard confirms that N'Golo Kante, Thiago Silva, and also Mason Mount have travelled to Spain, and in effect, they are available for that tie at the Bernabeu. Thiago Silva first, he's been out for around about 6 or just over 6 weeks. So the indication is he's probably not match fit and he's going to be more of a squad player at this point. And maybe this weekend's game might come a little bit too soon for him. One to watch, N'Golo Kante. Of course, he was omitted from the matchday squad last weekend. That was purely down to the fact that he's returning from a long-term injury. His minutes will be managed. So depending on how long he plays against Madrid, could impact his availability for this weekend. And also Mason Mount. He had a reaction in training last Friday. We know this is a loading issue to do with the groin. There was a reaction in there, evaluated from day to day. So I wouldn't be pinning too much hope on Mason Mount being available from game week to game week. Again, we can watch on Wednesday night, and see how many minutes he plays, and that may give us some indication on what the likelihood is maybe for this weekend. Now, moving ahead to the Europa League on Thursday, Manchester United, we have heard from Erik ten Hag the big news with regards to Marcus Rashford. We've seen him limp off with that adductor groin-related problem. Now, he confirms that it will be a few games that the attacker will miss, and the expectation is that he will be available for that season running. Now, nothing definitive in terms of a timeline or time frame, and that's mainly due to the fact that the player will be going through those rehab protocols, and it will be depend on his response to how he progresses through those. So again, nothing too serious, thankfully. I suggested at the time we may be looking at around about 2 to 3 weeks, and it sort of fits with that. Now, thankfully, they have a game this weekend against Nottingham Forest, but the following weekend, it's the FA Cup semi-final against Brighton, and then they don't get into Premier League action again towards the later end of April against Tottenham Hotspur. So there's a couple of weeks play there in terms of your fantasy assets. And Luke Shaw, Erik ten Hag said that his return is imminent. That's a hamstring issue. As always, you've got to remain very cautious with regards to return to play. So if he doesn't make that Forest game, then certainly we would expect, as long as there hasn't been any kind of adverse reaction, that he will be back in game week 32. Now, moving on to Newcastle United, Alan Saint-Maximin tweaked his hamstring back in game week 29. That kept him out of the game at Brentford at the weekend, and that allowed Eddie Howe to change things up slightly. Now, the first opening 45 minutes wasn't great, and again, he made 2 changes at the break, so that calls into question again on who he's going to start with. We've seen the impact of Callum Wilson from the bench in recent games, and it was Wilson who dropped out with Alexander Isak coming into the starting 11 down at the G-Tech Stadium. Now, that was based purely on Isak's again, his return from long-term injury had started 2 games in quick succession in really great form, and the 2 players will be played together at some point, Eddie Howe says, but he won't be willing to risk too much tactical changes or take too many chances on doing that. So whether that happens this weekend or not remains to be seen. We also seen Anthony Gordon come on at halftime for Jacob Murphy. He had been in great form, but he hadn't really made an impact during that first 45 minutes. So there's 1 or 2 positions slightly up for grabs. Elsewhere, Levi Colwell will be out, cannot line up against his parent club. So that means Adam Webster will probably come into that starting lineup. A little bit unfortunate to miss out in game week 30 after getting that man of the match performance in his previous appearance. A few updates elsewhere. We're waiting for assessments and evaluations and the results of MRI scans, but certainly Harvey Barnes' hamstring will be considered a major doubt for Dean Smith's first game in charge. Also, Pontus Jansson, we're expecting him to miss out for Brentford. That could open the door for Zanka, a good, cheap, low-budget option to come into that Brentford team. Pontus Jansson returning off a long-term hamstring injury, and it looks as if it was a bit of a recurrence in and around that. Potentially an opening at right back at Everton. Seamus Coleman limped off late on. Whether he recovers or not remains to be seen, but Nathan Patterson would be a like-for-like swap. And also Leon Bailey, that's another muscle-related problem. He could miss out for Aston Villa. Might be the only change from the side last weekend. Of course, they're in the early kick-off against Newcastle, but I expect it would be Bertrand Traore to start following his goal last weekend. That's it for the moment. Of course, we will have all of the usual press conference roundups and our live Q&A on Friday with Jason McKenna. But if you have any questions, please reach out via Twitter or pop them in the comments box below.